They came down with 50,000 troops, fully armored, armed to the teeth. Their gear was cutting edge, battle suits that moved like second skin, plasma rifles that could carve through stone in seconds, and their gunships? One pass over a district and it'd be gone. No more than a heartbeat. This was the biggest force the Kaldorian Empire had ever sent to one colony world. They figured humanity would fold within 3 days, 72 hours flat. Turns out, even the capital took 6 whole months just to bring under control. And after 3 long years of holding the planet, the High Command got a report so unexpected. Every general in the room fell silent. Their 50,000 soldier occupation force had been cut down to just 31,000. Not from space battles, not from human warships, not from fancy weapons or flashy tech. No, from farmers, miners, teachers, shopkeepers, regular folks who'd spent time studying something the Kaldorians never even bothered to try. The full gritty history of how humans fight when they can't win the usual way. This is the story of New Vietnam, the colony world where humanity showed once and for all, you don't need the strongest army to win a war. You just need to make the enemy wish they'd never started one in the first place. New Vietnam was everything a colony world should be. Located 340 light-years from Earth in the Kepler cluster, the planet had been settled 80 years before the Kaldorian invasion. By 2289, it had a population of 4.2 million people. They grew food. They mined rare minerals. They built schools and hospitals and parks. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives on a world that felt like home. The Kaldorian Empire had been watching New Vietnam for years. Not because the humans were a military threat. They weren't. New Vietnam had no standing army, no fleet of warships, just a small colonial defense force of about 3,000 soldiers with outdated weapons. The Kaldorians wanted the planet's minerals, specifically, a rare compound called viridium found deep in New Vietnam's mountain ranges. Viridium powered Kaldorian faster than light drives. Without it, their empire would stop expanding. The math was simple. New Vietnam had what the Kaldorians needed. The humans couldn't stop them from taking it. So on March 15, 2289, the Kaldorian occupation fleet jumped into New Vietnam's system. 200 warships, 50,000 soldiers, enough firepower to crack open a moon. The colonial governor sent one message to Earth before communications went dark. They're here. We can't stop them conventionally. But we remember our history. Tell Earth not to worry about us. Worry about the Kaldorians. Earth Command spent 3 days trying to figure out what that last part meant. They found out 3 years later. The Kaldorian landing went exactly as planned. Their gunships destroyed the colonial defense force in 4 hours. Their ground troops secured the capital city of New Saigon in 48 hours. Governor Chen formally surrendered on day 3. Occupation Commander Veth Kal stood in the capital's main square and announced that New Vietnam was now a Kaldorian protectorate. Humans would continue their daily lives. They just had to follow Kaldorian rules. Rule 1, no weapons. Rule 2, humans work the mines. Kaldorians keep the viridium. Rule 3, any resistance gets punished immediately. This is going to be easy, Commander Veth Kal wrote in his report to High Command. Humans are afraid. They will cooperate. He had never studied Earth history. If he had, he would have recognized the look on the humans' faces. It wasn't fear. It was patience. For the first month, everything did seem easy. Humans went to work. Humans went home. Kaldorian patrols moved through the streets without incident. But in the background, things were happening that Commander Veth Kal's sensors couldn't detect. Old man Nguyen Van Min, 71 years old, retired history teacher, started holding reading groups, except the reading material was unusual. Mao Zedong's writings on guerrilla warfare, Ho Chi Minh's military strategy documents, Che Guevara's training manuals, the collected works of every successful insurgency in human history. Nguyen hadn't been a soldier. He had been a teacher. But he had spent 40 years studying exactly one subject, how small forces defeat large ones. He knew things Commander Veth Kal had never imagined. Guerrilla warfare has 3 phases, Nguyen told his first group of 12 people in his basement. Strategic retreat, guerrilla fighting, counteroffensive. We are in phase 1 right now. We prepare, we train, we wait. We make them comfortable. How long? Asked Maria Santos, 28, former colonial militia sergeant. As long as it takes, Nguyen said. The enemy has superior weapons. We have something better. We know this planet, and we are willing to wait longer than they are willing to stay. 6 months into the occupation, Commander Vethkal sent another happy report to High Command. Viridium extraction was ahead of schedule. Human workers were cooperative. No significant resistance detected. He did note some minor incidents. A power generator that exploded from what appeared to be equipment failure. A supply convoy that got lost when its navigation systems malfunctioned. 3 Kaldorian soldiers who vanished while on night patrol and were never found. He classified these as accidents. By this point, Nguyen's reading group had become a network of 400 trained resistance fighters spread across 23 cells throughout New Vietnam. They still hadn't fired a single shot. Phase 1 was almost complete. On the 1-year anniversary of the invasion, Nguyen sent a single coded message to all 23 cells across New Vietnam. The message was 3 words. Phase 2 begins. What happened next took the Kaldorians completely by surprise. Not because the attacks were massive. They weren't. Not because they were high-tech. They weren't. They were small, precise, and absolutely everywhere at once. At 2 a.m., every major power station on the planet went offline. Not destroyed, just disabled. Specific components removed or damaged in ways that took hours to repair. At 2:15 a.m., communications between Kaldorian bases went down. Not all of them, just enough to create confusion about what was happening where. At 2:30 a.m., fuel depots across the planet found that their reserves had been contaminated with a substance that looked exactly like fuel, but caused Kaldorian engines to malfunction. At 3:00 a.m., Commander Vethkal was awakened by his staff. He looked at the damage reports coming in from across the planet and said something that his translator rendered as the Kaldorian equivalent of, "What is happening?" His intelligence officer had an answer he didn't like. "They planned this for a year, Commander. Every attack was coordinated. Every target was chosen to cause maximum disruption with minimum risk to the attackers. They didn't try to destroy anything. They just made everything stop working." "How many fighters?" Vethkal asked. "We don't know," the intelligence officer said. "We have no bodies, no weapons left behind, no communication intercepts. We don't know who did this." Vethkal stared at the map for a long time. "Find them," he said. Nguyen explained the strategy to his fighters in simple terms. "The Kaldorians have better weapons, better armor, better ships. We cannot beat them in a straight fight, so we never fight straight. Rule 1, never attack where they are strong, always attack where they are weak. A power cable, a fuel line, a supply route, a soldier who went somewhere alone. Rule 2, never stay in one place, hit and run, always run. The goal is not to win every fight. The goal is to make every day exhausting. Rule 3, use the environment. We grew up here. We know every mountain, every river, every cave. They don't. The planet itself is our weapon. Rule 4, attack their minds, not just their bodies. Make them afraid of the dark. Make them distrust the humans who serve them. Make them feel like they are surrounded by enemies, even in a quiet room. Rule 5, be patient. This does not end in 1 month or 1 year. We are building towards something. Every small action weakens them a little more. Eventually, they will decide New Vietnam isn't worth it. Commander Vethkal made his first big mistake on day 400 of the occupation. He sent large patrols into the jungle regions to hunt the resistance fighters. The jungle of New Vietnam was not like anything the Kaldorians had trained in. High humidity, dense vegetation that blocked their sensors, wildlife that triggered motion detectors constantly, temperatures that made their cooling systems work overtime. Humans had been living in New Vietnam's jungles for 80 years. They had built trails, hideouts, supply caches, and communication networks throughout the dense forests. The Kaldorian patrols found nothing except confusion, but the resistance found the patrols. Maria Santos led a team of 8 fighters who had been tracking Patrol Group 7 for 3 days. 20 Kaldorian soldiers in full battle armor, armed with plasma rifles, moving through the jungle in search of rebels. Maria's team had no plasma rifles. They had hunting weapons, homemade traps, and intimate knowledge of every inch of that jungle. At dawn on day 3, Patrol Group 7 walked into a section of jungle where the resistance had spent 2 weeks preparing. The trail looked normal, but it wasn't. The first soldier triggered a pressure plate that released a cloud of a local plant's irritant spores. Harmless but blinding and intensely uncomfortable. While the patrol stopped to deal with the affected soldiers, a second team released a family of New Vietnam's equivalent of hornets near the rear of the patrol. Kaldorian battle armor was excellent against plasma fire. It was not designed to handle swarms of angry insects finding gaps at wrist joints and helmet seals. While the patrol was in complete chaos, Maria's team fired 3 shots each at the patrol's communication equipment and transport vehicles, then disappeared into the jungle in 30 seconds. When Commander Vethkal got the report, he read it twice. 20 soldiers in full battle armor had been defeated by insects and plants, and he still didn't know where the resistance fighters were. Stop for a second. Because what happened next is the part the Kaldorian High Command never put in their official records. There's a reason this story matters beyond just one colony world. There's a reason Earth Command used the New Vietnam campaign in military training for 200 years after it ended. Because Nguyen Van Minh and his resistance fighters didn't just use guerrilla tactics. They used every guerrilla war in human history simultaneously. The jungle ambush tactics of Vietnam, the urban sabotage methods of the French resistance in World War II, the psychological operations used in Afghanistan, the supply line disruption strategies from the American Revolutionary War, the patient, decade-long insurgency model from the Irish Republican Army. Humans had been fighting insurgency wars for 10,000 years. We had lost some, we had won many, and we had written down everything we learned. The Kaldorians had never fought a guerrilla war in their entire history. They were walking into 10,000 years of human experience without knowing it existed. And what they were about to face in the next 18 months would force them to ask a question they had never asked about any species before. Was New Vietnam actually worth it? Let's find out. By month 18, Commander Vethkal had a problem that his weapons couldn't solve. His soldiers were afraid. Not afraid in a way they could fight against. Afraid in a way that lived inside their heads all the time. Every Kaldorian soldier on New Vietnam knew someone who had disappeared on patrol. Every unit had experienced at least one supply run that went wrong. Every base had heard the alarms go off at 2 a.m. at least once. Nothing felt safe. Nothing felt secure. The resistance hadn't killed thousands of them. They had killed, sabotaged, and disrupted just enough, just regularly enough, that every single day on New Vietnam felt dangerous. This was not an accident. It was a plan. Nguyen had one more weapon that nobody expected. Information. The resistance had managed to keep a low-power communication link open to Earth throughout the occupation. And Earth had been sending something very specific back. Not weapons, not soldiers, not money. Earth sent propaganda. Specifically designed, carefully crafted information aimed directly at Kaldorian soldiers. The transmissions were broadcast on frequencies the Kaldorian personal communicators could receive, and the content was deeply unsettling to anyone who received it. Your High Command told you this would be over in 72 hours. It has been 18 months. How many of your friends have not come home? How many more will you lose before they admit this isn't working? Xie and the humans of New Vietnam are not terrorists. They are farmers and teachers defending their home. You are 340 light-years from your family. How long will you stay? Your commanders know the occupation is failing. They are not telling you the truth. Check your casualty reports. Check how far behind the Viridium extraction is. Someone is lying to you. Commander Vethkal ordered soldiers to stop listening to the transmissions. Most of them kept listening, because the transmissions had been right about the casualty reports. In the capital city, the resistance operated differently from the jungle teams. Urban warfare required different skills, different patience, different creativity. The urban cells never carried weapons near checkpoints. They never met in groups larger than 2 or 3. They never communicated by any method the Kaldorians could intercept. Instead, they used something no Kaldorian scanner could detect: how they arranged items in a market stall, which direction a shop sign faced, whether a window was open or closed. A language built from the ordinary visual details of daily life that only resistance members knew how to read. Through this invisible language, the urban cells coordinated actions that looked like pure coincidence to outside observers. A Kaldorian officer's vehicle fuel was quietly replaced with the contaminated version. 3 hours later, His vehicle broke down on the least convenient road in the city, blocking supply deliveries for half a day. A Kaldorian database was accessed through a terminal in the city's water treatment plant, which the Kaldorians had never thought to secure, because why would they? It was a water plant. The data extracted from that access was compressed, hidden inside a routine maintenance report, and transmitted to Earth in a format that looked like equipment diagnostics. Earth received complete Kaldorian deployment plans for the entire New Vietnam system, all from a water plant that the Kaldorians never thought to guard. By month 24, Commander Vethkal faced his worst problem yet. He couldn't trust the humans who worked for him. The occupation required human translators, drivers, maintenance workers, and food service staff to function. The Kaldorians had screened all of them carefully before hiring them. What Vethkal didn't know was that the screening process had been compromised. The humans conducting part of the screening were resistance members. Over 24 months, 34 resistance cells had placed members inside Kaldorian bases, administrative offices, and supply centers. They weren't there to kill anyone. They were there to watch, listen, and report. Every Kaldorian base layout, every patrol schedule, every supply delivery time, every officer's routine. The resistance knew the occupation better than most Kaldorian soldiers did. When Vethkal finally figured out the scope of the infiltration, he called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. "We have a complete intelligence failure," he said. "We do not know who we can trust. We do not know what information they have. We do not know how many of our facilities have been compromised." His intelligence officer looked at the ceiling and said nothing. "Recommendations?" Vethkal asked. No one had any good answers. By the beginning of year 3, the numbers told the story clearly. Kaldorian forces, down from 50,000 to 31,000 soldiers. Not from major battles. From hundreds of small incidents across 3 years. Viridium extraction, operating at 34% of projected capacity. Supply line disruptions, equipment sabotage, and worker slowdowns had cut production by 2/3. Cost of occupation, 340 times what the High Command had projected. Morale, classified, but reports from field officers described units that jumped at shadows, refused night patrols, and were requesting rotation home at record rates. The Kaldorian High Command called an emergency meeting that Commander Vethkal attended by communication link from New Vietnam. The High Command Admiral looked at the numbers for a long time before speaking. "This occupation is economically negative," he said. "We are spending more maintaining it than we are extracting in Viridium." Vethkal had known this was coming. "The resistance is well organized, better than any opposition force we have faced. They are using tactics from their historical archives, tactics we have no doctrine for." "How long to break the resistance?" the Admiral asked. Vethkal was quiet for a moment. "Unknown," he said. "Possibly never. They are not fighting to win individual battles. They are fighting to make the occupation economically and psychologically unsustainable. They are succeeding." The resistance had a member who worked in the communications center that handled Vethkal's link to High Command. She didn't interfere with the transmission, but she listened to every word. That night, Nguyen sent a message to all cells. "They are discussing withdrawal. Maintain pressure. Do not let up. Do not get overconfident. Keep doing exactly what we have been doing. Every small action still matters. We are in phase 3. If anything, the resistance became slightly more active in the weeks following that meeting. Nothing dramatic, just an increase in the frequency of small incidents. A Kaldorian general's personal shuttle was found with its navigation system reprogrammed to lead it in circles before anyone noticed. 3 ammunition depots simultaneously developed inventory discrepancies that took 2 weeks to reconcile. The water in the senior officer's mess hall began tasting slightly but unmistakably wrong. Not dangerous, just bad enough to make eating unpleasant. Small things, petty things, but constant, relentless, everywhere. Commander Vethkal sat in his command post and looked at the daily incident report. There were 47 separate entries, 47 small problems, every single day. He thought about what the Admiral had asked. How long to break the resistance? He finally understood the answer. Not ever, because the resistance wasn't fighting a military campaign. It was fighting a patience contest. And in a patience contest between humans defending their home and soldiers serving an empire 340 light-years away from theirs, there was only one possible winner. On November 3, 2292, 3 years and 233 days after the invasion, Commander Vethkal received official orders from High Command. Withdraw all occupation forces. Cease Viridium extraction. New Vietnam operation is concluded. And he watched his soldiers loading onto transport ships from the capital's spaceport. 31,000 soldiers going home. 19,000 fewer than had arrived. None of them lost in a single major battle. All of them ground down by thousands of small defeats over 3.5 years. The humans of New Vietnam didn't celebrate in the streets, while the Kaldorians were still present. They were too disciplined for that. They watched quietly from windows and doorways as the last transport ship lifted off. When the last ship cleared the atmosphere, someone in the capital started clapping, then someone else, then everyone at once. The most powerful military force the Kaldorian Empire had ever deployed on a single world was leaving, defeated by farmers, teachers, and a retired history teacher who had spent 40 years reading about war. 3 months after the Kaldorian withdrawal, a Galactic Council intelligence team arrived on New Vietnam to study what had happened. They interviewed survivors, reviewed documents, and analyzed the resistance's tactics in detail. Their report to the Council was classified for 50 years. When it was finally released, it contained one line that became famous in military history across dozens of civilizations. The New Vietnam resistance did not develop its own tactics. It applied a comprehensive library of insurgency doctrine accumulated over 10,000 years of human conflict. No other species in known space has equivalent historical documentation of asymmetric warfare. Humanity has been fighting this type of conflict since before recorded history. What the Kaldorian military found when they finally investigated Earth's history properly hit them like a physical blow. Humans had been fighting insurgency wars since before they had writing, before they had cities, before they had any technology at all. 10,000 years of smaller forces defeating larger ones using patience, environment, psychology, and creativity. The American Revolution, the Spanish resistance against Napoleon, the Vietnamese conflicts against multiple foreign powers, the Afghan wars, the Irish independence struggle, partisan warfare in World War II, urban insurgencies across a dozen countries across 5 centuries, and humans had written all of it down, studied it, taught it in schools, analyzed what worked and what didn't, improved the methods over generations. Nguyen Van Minh hadn't invented anything on New Vietnam. He had applied a library that humanity had been building for 10,000 years, a library that no other species had, because no other species had fought this many wars against this many different opponents over this many years. The Kaldorian general who received the intelligence brief about Earth's military history sat quietly for a long time after reading it. Then he said something that became famous. We studied their warships. We studied their weapons technology. We studied their planetary defenses. We studied everything they build to make war. We never studied what they know about war. Those are completely different things, and we made a very expensive mistake. What New Vietnam meant. Back on Earth, Admiral Chen's successor read the final report from New Vietnam and called a meeting of the Joint Chiefs. The Kaldorians spent 3 years and 19,000 soldiers trying to understand what hit them, she said. I want to make sure every military ally and every potential enemy understands it clearly. Humanity's greatest military asset is not our fleet. It's not our weapons systems. It's not even our willingness to sacrifice. She paused and looked around the table. It's our history. We have been fighting for 10,000 years. We have lost wars. We have won wars. And we have written down every lesson from every single one. No species in the galaxy has that library. No species in the galaxy has that experience. When we fight, we are not just fighting with what we have today. We are fighting with everything humanity has ever learned. She closed the report and looked at the tactical display showing New Vietnam, free and recovering. That is what the galaxy needs to understand about humans. We are not just a military species. We are the military species. We are the only ones who learned every possible way that a war can go, and we remember all of it. Visual montage of New Vietnam's recovery alongside Earth history images. Nguyen Van Minh was 75 years old when the last Kaldorian ship left New Vietnam. He went back to teaching history 6 months after the withdrawal. His classes were always full. Visual Nguyen in a classroom again. Maria Santos became the first commander of New Vietnam's rebuilt colonial defense force. She wrote a training manual that Earth Command distributed across 47 colony worlds. It was called Environment Patience Psychology, the Complete Guide to Colonial Defense. It was immediately classified, then immediately copied and distributed by people who thought it was too important not to share. Visual, the manual spreading across human colonies. The Kaldorian Empire never attempted to occupy another human world, not because their fleet wasn't powerful enough, because their intelligence analysts had finally read Earth history properly, and they had found a statistic that ended the discussion immediately. Visual, statistics display. In 10,000 years of recorded human conflict, the success rate of foreign powers attempting long-term occupation of territories where the local population actively resisted was, dramatic pause, 0%. Visual, Earth spinning slowly in space. Not low, not poor, not discouraging. 0. No foreign power in human history had ever successfully maintained a long-term occupation against a determined local resistance. Not one. The Kaldorian Empire was not going to be the first. New Vietnam proved something that humans already knew deep in their bones, but had never had to explain to the galaxy before. You can occupy our buildings, you can take our resources, you can disarm our soldiers, but you cannot occupy a people who have spent 10,000 years learning exactly how to make you leave, because we have been here before, in different places, different times, different enemies, and the answer has always been the same. We wait, we adapt, we resist, we remember, and we always outlast you. We are humans, and you cannot hold what is ours. In memory of every person who ever defended their home with nothing but courage and patience. If the Kaldorians invaded your colony world, what would you do first? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more HFY stories every week. Next episode. The Marine who held Devil's Canyon alone. One soldier. 16 hours, 3,000 lives saved.